And welcome to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Glad you're with us. Merry Christmas. And we have a show today that's kind of about the new year and the new decade.
It is. We're going to talk about the census, the constitutionally mandated counting of all the people in this country, something that was going on, I guess, at about the time of the birth of Christ. There was a census going on at the time. But Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Thank you very much. Yes, so they thought it made a great idea in 1790 to have a census. I guess the question is, does it still make sense in 2010? And we'll examine some of those issues today on The Verdict.
A greener planet, cleaner air, a healthy economy, national security, a smaller deficit and a stronger dollar, green jobs, better jobs, energy independence, warmth and light and transportation. These are the reasons Chesapeake champions natural gas every day.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Very pleased today to have Dr. Keith Gaddy join us. Dr. Gaddie is a professor of political science at the University of Oklahoma, did his undergraduate work at Florida State, got his PhD at the University of Georgia. He is the author or co-author of 11 books dealing with the political process and voting and election matters. He has been involved in many redistricting issues, representing both independent individuals, Republicans and Democrats. He has testified before both the House and the Senate Judiciary Committee on redistricting matters, and this is his first appearance on The Verdict. Keith, sure glad to have you.
Well, Ken, it's a pleasure to be here. Mick, Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Merry
Good to have
Christmas to you.
Well, we're talking about the census today. Why do we have one?
Well, we have one because the Constitution mandates it, Mick. The big debate at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 was, would representation come through the states or from the people? And the power of the Constitution is derived from the people, and the lower house is apportioned by population. Each state gets representatives based on the number of people they have, so we have a census to determine how much political power every state in the Union gets. That's the one true purpose of the census. Second application of the census is that it can be used to apportion tax obligation or to apportion benefits and spending from government into the states. So the census is very important in terms of allocating political power.
Was it kind of on the honor system? And how did the federal government know if the states were counting accurately in 1790?
Well, the federal government, in a fashion that would probably upset some states' rights people even today, sent federal marshals out to count people. So what the U.S. government did is they took their deputized marshals of the federal courts and sent them out to get a count of individuals in the counties and in the communities in every state in the Union.
Wow, that must have been a tough process.
Now, I should know this, but I don't. Has it always been a 10-year matter?
Yeah.
Counting every 10 years?
Yeah, it is. It's mandated that a census shall be taken at least every 10 years. So we could have a census more often if Congress deemed it necessary through statute, but we must take a census at least every 10 years, and there's supposed to be an obligation for the U.S. House to reapportion itself after every census, but they haven't always done it.
Well, In other words, if one political party, for instance, felt disadvantaged because of a major population swing, but the 10 years had not expired, they could somehow try to bring about an interim census?
The law is not certain on this because no one's ever tried, but if you look carefully at the language of the Constitution, there is room in there for an intermediate census to be taken. And in fact, if we look at what the U.S. Census Bureau does, they're collecting information on population all the time. And one thing we do is we get estimates periodically throughout the decade from surveys of population shifts. And right now here in Oklahoma, one thing we know is that Oklahoma County and Oklahoma City have been growing significantly. Oklahoma County is going to end up with a lot more control over Congressional District 5, which is substantially overpopulated right now. When we redraw the maps, that district's going to get smaller, physically smaller. We already know that. In addition to that, Congress recently apportioned a couple of additional seats, allocating an additional one to Utah and also allocating a delegate to the District of Columbia as an interim, temporarily increasing the size of the U.S. House to 437. So there's precedent for expanding Congress at midterm, in part based upon anticipating changes in population.
Is the D.C. a voting member?
It was supposed to be. I haven't checked on the legal status of that recently. The truth is, at the end of the day, the D.C. delegate had been a voting member on all matters except for votes on amendment and final passage of legislation. They voted in what's called the Committee of the Whole. They had committee assignments and voted in committee. So too with territorial delegates from places like Guam and the Virgin Islands. But the D.C. delegate, the legal status of the D.C. delegate as a full voting member is really very uncertain because the Constitution says that voting power shall be apportioned to the states. And as much as D.C. has special status, it's not a state.
Well, originally, it sounds to me like they just wanted a number, and somehow we've gotten to this point now where it's a lot of demographic information. What's the history of that? How did it evolve from just a number to determining the number of men, number of women, the ages, and so on?
Well, Mick, it's sort of like path dependency. You discover a path you can go down. And when the government started to want more information, they asked the question, where do we come in contact with people to gather this information? And that was through the census. Census Bureau is in the Department of Commerce. And because the Department of Commerce is interested in collecting information about a variety of aspects of the population and of the business climate in the United States, it made sense to go through the census. But a lot of information came in because we needed it. Racial information was originally collected because we needed to count on slaves, because we had to adjust populations to account for slave population according to the Constitution. Later, we simply discovered that it was convenient to gather information, and then as public policy becomes more and more proactive and acts on different aspects of society, we needed information about that population, and we get things like the General Population Survey, which collects information on the public. And this, in turn, opened the door for the census to be a tool for market research. People looked up and said, where is information on the population? Census Bureau has historically asked all sorts of questions on their long form and through their General Population Survey.
As a professor of political science, is it something you would have expected that the requirement to conduct the census would be encompassed in our Constitution rather than simply in federal statute?
Yeah, it is, because if you're going to apportion by population, you want to put that mandate in order to preserve. Ken, as you well know, if you want to permanently make your values part of society, you put them in the Constitution. And if popular representation is something you value, and the vehicle for popular representation is getting an accurate count through the census, you would make it a constitutional mandate rather than just making it law. Because if we went to an alternative measure like tax filings or votes cast in previous elections rather than an actual count, the ability of the national government to get a fair comparative count across states is diminished.
Now, who do we count? Just
Everybody.
bodies?
Everybody.
It doesn't matter whether they're citizens.
It's a nose count. It doesn't matter if it's a citizen. It doesn't matter if it's a legal immigrant. Illegal immigrants get counted in the census. Basically, anyone who is a permanent resident of the United States is counted in the census because the mandate is to count residents, not citizens. Now, I'll tell you though, Kent, this raises a big issue in representation. It's one that former Congressman Ernest Istook used to talk about a great deal, which is that if you go to Texas, you go to California, you go to Arizona, you have large migrant populations, largely legal, but also illegal migrant populations. and their numbers get counted in the census, and these states get additional congressional representation because these non-citizens are counted. If you apportion power based upon citizen count rather than just raw population count, Oklahoma would pick up 1 congressional seat.
Well, what's the history of counting non-citizens? Was that always intended, or was citizenship not addressed in the original census document?
Citizenship is not explicitly addressed in the original citizenship document. In fact, citizenship issues in the U.S. don't become a matter of real debate until the 1840s, with large waves of immigrants coming from Eastern Europe and from Southern Europe. Citizenship issues usually arise in response to the influx of large migrant groups, and this would include African Americans losing their slave status and being put into an uncertain legal status as freedmen, but not necessarily citizens. The 13th and 14th Amendments out of the Civil War were designed to address those issues of citizenship status for freed blacks. So we have constantly returned to this. Native Americans are not addressed as true citizens of the U.S. until legislation by Congress in the 1920s. And this is an ongoing debate in this country, is what is citizenship? Where does it come from?
Well, I don't know that we have time to address it now before the break, but I'd like for you to think about transients and in which state they are, to which state they're attributed.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. Keith Gaddy is our guest. We're discussing the United States Census. It's just about time to look around your house, see how many people are there. We'll be right back.
To be Chickasaw, you have strength, you have faith, and your family comes first.
I was diagnosed with FSGS, which is a progressive kidney disease that leads to kidney failure.
I believe that being Chickasaw makes me strong. It made me a strong mother for Melissa.
She told me that day, don't worry, I'll be there for you. I've got 2 kidneys, you can have 1.
They took me in first, and we just hugged each other, and I said, Melissa, it's almost time, it's gonna be all right.
My mom has given me life twice, and how do you ever thank someone for giving you a second chance? Through those challenging times, my family and I knew that we were gonna get through it, that we are a Chickasaw family, and that whatever obstacle may arise, together we will conquer it.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods. We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites. We called the OERB, and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. It didn't cost us a thing. Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
Welcome back. We're still talking about the census during the break here. I remember they had a long form and a short form. Are we doing that again this time?
No, Mick, we're not doing that anymore. It used to be, some folks will remember that usually you get your census packet in the mail, usually in the late spring, and it'd be a relatively brief packet, probably shorter than your income tax packet, and you go through and you'd fill it out and send it back in. But there was also this thing called the long form, and 1 in every 6 households in every census block received the long form to fill out. And the long form had all the detailed information about your household, asked detailed information not just about your earnings, but your employment status, the history of your family, questions about your household, how many bathrooms do you have, whatever. And this form was almost exhaustive. We have gotten rid of the long form. And what we're now going to do is simply supplement the what used to be the long form information with periodic surveys, what's called the General Population Survey that the Department of Commerce does through the Census Bureau every year. This is a national survey of a couple of 100,000 people. And the statistics from that data will be used to simply round out what used to be done with the long form.
Now, is that voluntary compliance?
What, with the census?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Now,
I mean, if you said, I don't want you to ask these questions. I don't want to talk to you.
well, what will happen is they'll persist after you because initially you'll be contacted by mail. And then if you don't respond to mail, what will happen is you will likely get a door knock. You'll get a door knock from the Census Bureau collector, and what will happen with that Bureau collector is if they can't get you to fill out the form there, or if you're hostile, and don't shoot a census worker because that's a federal crime. You should make note of that. A census collector is a federal officer, and there's, I think, a 10-year penalty for assaulting a census worker. We'll check. I'll have the lawyer check on that for me, but it is a very serious felony to attack a federal officer collecting the census. What will happen is they will attempt to get a count. A census worker is empowered to attempt to get a count, but this leads to a problem in the opposite direction, which is depending upon how well trained that officer is, and a lot of these folks are volunteers, depending upon their ethics, from time to time data get falsified in the census. It's very rare, very unusual, but we get what are called false counts. And you know, it is a challenge for the census. And we have not seen physical evidence of it yet except for spot checking. But when we go back, as we get through time and go through history, we're going to discover when census records are made available 80 years after a census is taken, we can look into those records and see what's going on and take that information and tie it to particular people from the census. And anybody that does genealogy research has had experience with this material and knows what I'm talking about.
Let me go back to that transient question that
Yes.
we talked about. Let's say that we're talking about the wheat harvest, and it comes out in the spring or the early summer, and they happen to be in Kansas at the time,
Right.
rolling northward up to the Canadian border. Is that where they're counted, in Kansas?
Yeah, I'll tell you the truth, Kent. I have never even thought about the question until you asked me. I do more reapportionment and redistricting work. Usually when you survey people for census, you're taking census at a permanent address, an existing permanent address. And one of the things the Census Bureau does collect is information on temporary or migrant worker information. The census tends to collect only information on agricultural workers who are in place permanently rather than transient agricultural workers. But the presumption of the census is it collects information on you where your address is, which is assumed to be your permanent taxing address. I mean, I don't know what you do with the carnies. They don't pay taxes as a general rule. So I guess we have to run them down and catch them.
Well, we know that congressional redistricting takes place, state redistricting takes place in legislatures across the country. In cities like ours, we redo our wards based on that count. Anything else out there of interest based solely on the count?
Well, based solely on the count, there is, the count can have an influence on how monies from federal grant programs are allocated to a state. The share of federal money a state will receive is dependent in part upon its population. But I tell you, Mick, you hit on the really important issue, which is this redistricting and reapportionment issue. Oklahoma has 5 members of Congress, and it will continue to have 5 members of Congress. We're looking at about 3.7 million people in the state, if estimates hold correct, which means that each congressional district is going to be 740,000 people, which is a very, very large district. It's a huge amount of population.
How close were we to getting that seat back?
We're pretty close, actually.
What year did we lose it, or what time period?
We had 6 seats from the 1950s through the 1990s, and we were seat number 447 going into the 2000 reapportionment cycle. But we've reversed our population losses relative to the country. I mean, thanks to what's going on in Metro Oklahoma City and what's going on in the suburbs around Oklahoma City, and also down south. We're seeing a boom in population in Oklahoma after years and years of people leaving. So we might be in a position to reverse. I think we're going to come up short. And as it stands right now, you can fix the equal population requirement of the districts in the state with relatively minor changes for Congress. But in terms of the state legislature, there are big changes coming. Western Oklahoma is emptying out. Southeastern Oklahoma has some areas that are emptying out. Our suburbs are growing. Our central city is growing in this area. Yeah. And we should see more representation coming into central Oklahoma. In fact, the suburbs of Oklahoma City itself, and city of Tulsa proper have enough people to command a majority of the state legislature.
Wow.
It's the first time ever in
First time
state
ever.
history. Yeah.
First time ever. And part of what's going to happen is we're going to be back to the old fight again of modern versus rustic, rural versus urban, fighting over where the political power is going to be. Because the rural areas have gone Republican, now the Democrats are coming back in the suburbs and central cities.
Is there a good solution to the politicizing that seems to take place over the redistricting process, especially inside the state? You know, the gerrymandering that goes on, it seems to be, all sorts of political issues seem to come up. And one example, we have people representing people that live in Oklahoma City, and we have representation that can be 90 miles away.
Yeah.
And it just seems like they've drawn these just to grab some people in the Oklahoma City metro area, and then they run out to the rural areas to bring in other people.
Yeah, well, Mick, you've hit the nail on the head here. For years, what happened is rural areas were losing population, and rural lawmakers would extend their districts into the suburbs and into the city to pick up people, but not endanger their incumbency. I mean, you know, every incumbent politician wants to get reelected if he can, and when they can pick their voters, they will. So what happened is you had rural Democrats extending their districts into the burbs and into the city to pick up people. The best way around that is for the legislature to adopt a set of principles, and they need to do that in the coming session, that says the districts will be compact, they will be reasonably shaped, they will try and not extend districts across counties needlessly, okay? And what they will do is try and maintain some integrity in the process by following what are called good government principles. Keep the districts as equal in population as possible, maintain continuity of representation where possible. If they do these things, what happens is we won't have districts that go from Elk City to Yukon, or that go from down near Ada all the way up to Choctaw.
What about dividing demographics up by race, for instance, inside a municipality for wards? Is that ever been contested? Is that legal, illegal?
Oh boy. Now, Mick, I'm going to try and do this in 60 seconds. Race cannot be a predominant principle in a redistricting process. Shaw v. Reno, a case from the 1990s, ruled that if race is a predominant principle, what happens is you violated the 14th Amendment. But by the same token, if you have a history of racially divided voting and you have a concentration of minority voters that can make up a majority of a district, you have an obligation to create the district. My suggestion for anyone who is drawing districts in Oklahoma is turn race off. Just turn it off in your computers. Draw your districts, then go back and assess them at the back end and make sure you haven't done anything to eliminate existing minority opportunities. But if you act too affirmatively, you actually put yourself in a position to violate the law.
Sounds like good advice. We're out of time.
We are.
We should have had like 2 or 3 shows for this. Keith, thanks very much for coming in. You're a wealth of information. We appreciate your work.
Good to be
Really
here,
do
Mick.
appreciate it.
We'll have
And
to have
Mick,
you back on.
congratulations on the vote. Well done.
We're happy about it. Thank you. Kit and I'll have a final word after this.
It's time to meet the new people in power.
The people responsible for our energy future.
It's you.
It's me, all of us together.
From now on, we're the people in power.
OG&E will supply the power. It's how we apply the power that counts.
We've got to use electricity smarter,
Wiser.
cleaner,
Better.
So we've got to be informed,
Equipped.
prepared.
committed.
From now on.
Look, nobody wants to waste energy.
Nobody wants to build new power plants.
Nobody wants to pay more for electricity.
But nobody wants to give up their way of life.
We don't have to.
If we just use positive energy together.
I'll take advantage of off-peak hours. That means cutting energy use from 1 to 7 every day.
Every day. I'm going to sign up for more and more wind power.
We'll take advantage of the high-tech tools coming soon from OG&E.
OG&E can't do it alone.
It's you and OG&E working together.
Find dozens of ways you can help at OGE.com.
A positive energy future is in our power. Together.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. a legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Well, Keith Gaddy's a really good guest.
He is indeed.
A lot of information.
It was very interesting. I've wondered about a lot of that census stuff for a while, and he sure knows more about it than anybody.
It's very important, though, so please cooperate with your Census Bureau taker and look around your house and find all the people and report all the numbers.
Well, and they're looking for, right now, they're looking for temporary workers for a few months, paid positions, so if somebody's looking for a temporary job, look at census.com
and as Keith mentioned, there are grant monies that come out of Washington that are based on population and income levels and all sorts of demographic criteria. And so it is very important to get an accurate count. If you want Oklahoma and Oklahoma City ultimately to get its share of federal dollars, it's important to count as many people as possible. But of course, we want it to be accurate as possible too. Well, this was show number 450.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, same to you.
And,
I never thought we'd go this long.
Sometimes on the other side of the calendar, we're going to have our 500th show. Look forward
about
to
a year
it.
from now.
Merry Christmas. We'll see you next week.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.